I made one stupid decision that I thought was harmless, but it nearly got me killed that night. It all started when my friends dared me to explore an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. You know the type: broken windows, boarded up doors, and surrounded by creepy rumors of people going missing there. I didn't believe any of it, of course. I just wanted to prove I wasn't scared. So, there I was, flashlight in hand, stepping through the creaky front door. The smell hit me first: damp wood, rotting carpet, and something metallic that made my stomach turn. My friends waited outside, cheering and laughing, while I ventured further in. Every step felt heavier, the air colder, and the house darker than I thought possible. And then I heard it: slow, deliberate footsteps upstairs. They weren't mine. For a moment, I was motionless. I told myself it was nothing. An old house creaks, right? Maybe something had fallen upstairs. That's what I kept telling myself as I took another step forward. My flashlight beam trembled as much as my hand, cutting through the thick darkness. The walls were covered in graffiti, broken furniture was scattered everywhere, and there were strange stains on the floor that I didn't want to think about. "Keep going! You're almost there!" one of my friends shouted from outside, his voice muffled by the heavy, stale air of the house. I swallowed hard and called back, Yeah, I'm fine." But I wasn't. Something felt wrong, very wrong. I pushed through the living room, but I couldn't stop thinking about those footsteps upstairs. The rational part of me screamed, "Turn around, get out!" But the part of me that didn't want to look like a coward ignored it. I was already in too deep. The staircase loomed ahead of me. The wood was splintered, the banister missing chunks like someone, or something, had smashed it. I hesitated, but I didn't want to back out now. My pride wouldn't let me. Slowly I started up the steps. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and with each step, the metallic smell in the air grew stronger, almost like blood. Halfway up, I heard it again, the footsteps. But this time, they weren't slow. They were running, fast, from one side of the upstairs hallway to the other. I stopped dead in my tracks, clutching the flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me alive. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" No response, just silence. I reached the top of the stairs, and my flashlight flickered. Of course it flickered, because my luck couldn't get any worse. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that were barely hanging on their hinges. Some were open just enough to let shadows spill out into the hall. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach churn. The walls weren't just covered in graffiti, they were scratched up. Long, jagged marks ran along the length of the hallway, like claws had been dragged across the surface. I wanted to turn back. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Instead, I followed the sound of the footsteps. The last door on the left was wide open, and the faintest light spilled out from inside. I crept toward it, one shaky step at a time, holding my breath. I couldn't hear anything now, no footsteps, no movement, just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I reached the doorway, I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could feel something on the other side. I leaned in, shining my flashlight into the room, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was empty, but the floor was covered in fresh dirt, almost like someone had dug a hole and filled it back in. My flashlight landed on a shovel propped up in the corner, mud still clinging to the blade. And then there was the smell. It was overwhelming now, like something rotting, making my stomach turn. I was about to step inside when I felt it. Something brushed against the back of my neck, a light, ice-cold touch that made my entire body seize up. I whipped around, shining my flashlight down the hall. But it was empty, completely empty. I was alone. Or so I thought. My breathing grew shallow, and I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, maybe a draft from one of the broken windows. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't alone in that house. I stepped back from the doorway, my flashlight beam darting from side to side, trying to catch something, anything, moving in the darkness. But there was nothing, only the oppressive silence and the strange sensation that I was being watched. I wanted to yell for my friends outside, but my throat felt tight, like I couldn't force the words out. That's when I heard it, a low, deep whisper. My name. Ryan. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from behind me, from inside the room. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I swept it across the room. But it was still empty, just dirt on the floor, the shovel in the corner, and the faint outline of scratches on the walls. The whisper hadn't sounded human, and hearing my name sent chills crawling up my spine. "This isn't funny!" I shouted, hoping that somehow one of my friends had slipped inside to scare me. But I knew that wasn't possible. There hadn't been a sound from the front door, and the footsteps earlier. They were too heavy to belong to anyone I knew. I started backing out of the room, keeping the flashlight trained ahead of me. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but something held me there, like the house itself didn't want me to leave. Then the flashlight flickered again, just for a moment, but when the light came back, I saw it. The dirt in the middle of the floor had shifted. A long, thin line had been drawn in the dirt, as if an invisible hand had dragged a single finger across it. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted down the hallway, my shoes slipping on the warped wood. I was halfway to the stairs when the sound of footsteps exploded behind me, pounding across the floor, getting closer and closer. But when I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing there, just the darkness. I hit the stairs so fast I almost fell, my hand grabbing at the broken banister to keep myself upright. My flashlight flickered wildly as I descended, the beam bouncing off the walls and ceiling, and that's when I saw it. At the bottom of the stairs, standing in the middle of the living room, was a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, and completely still. It wasn't one of my friends. I could tell that much immediately. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, as if it was watching me, studying me. My breath caught in my throat as I froze mid-step. Its face. I can't even describe it. It wasn't right. The features were stretched, distorted, like a reflection in a warped mirror. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth, if you could call it a mouth, was twisted into this unnatural grin with rows of teeth that were too sharp, too jagged. I don't remember making a conscious decision to move. One moment I was staring at it, frozen in fear, and the next I was sprinting down the stairs, heading straight for the front door. But as I ran, the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. The door was only a few feet away, but it felt like miles. My friends were still outside. I could hear them faintly, laughing, completely oblivious to what was happening inside. My hand closed around the doorknob, and for a brief second, I thought I was safe. But then I felt it again, that ice-cold touch on the back of my neck. This time, it wasn't light. It wasn't subtle. It was a grip, strong and unrelenting, pulling me backward. I screamed, thrashing wildly, the flashlight clattering to the floor and rolling away, its beam spinning in circles. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was dragging me back toward the stairs. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating, like the house itself was alive and angry that I was trying to leave. In a blind panic, I kicked out, connecting with something solid. Whatever it was let go, and I didn't waste a second. I dove for the flashlight, grabbed it, and stumbled out the front door, collapsing onto the dirt outside. My friends rushed over, laughing and clapping me on the back, completely unaware of the terror I'd just endured. I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, staring at the house as my flashlight beam illuminated the dark doorway. That's when I saw it again. The figure. It was standing just inside the house, barely visible in the shadows, but I knew it was watching me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. One of my friends noticed my expression and followed my gaze. "What are you looking at?" he asked, squinting into the darkness. But when I turned to answer him, He wasn't there anymore. The figure, the house, it was gone. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. The house was gone, just an empty, overgrown lot, surrounded by trees. My friends were still laughing, oblivious to the fact that the house had vanished right before my eyes. "What's wrong with you?" one of them said, smirking as he handed me a bottle of water. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "You didn't see that?" I stammered, pointing to where the house had been. But when I looked again, there was nothing, just a field of weeds and rubble, as if the place hadn't existed in years. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. One of my friends stepped forward, squinting at the empty lot. "What are you talking about, man? There's nothing there. There's never been anything there. You sure you're okay?" "Never been?" I trailed off, my words catching in my throat. I was about to argue, to tell them what I'd seen, when I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window of our car. And that's when I froze, the back of my neck. It was covered in handprints, not one or two but dozens, pressed into my skin like bruises. They were pale, almost translucent, and ice cold to the touch. My stomach churned as I stumbled backward, my friends staring at me like I'd lost my mind. I wanted to scream at them, to make them believe me, but before I could say anything, something caught my eye. In the reflection, just over my shoulder, I saw it, that figure, the same one from inside the house. It was standing behind me, its distorted face inches from mine, grinning that impossible jagged grin. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there, just the empty lot and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "We need to go," I muttered, barely able to get the words out. "Go where?" "Dude, you're acting weird," one of my friends said. But the nervous look in his eyes told me he felt it too, that oppressive, suffocating energy that had followed me out of the house. Without another word, I climbed into the car, gripping the flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me safe. My friends reluctantly followed, still cracking jokes, but their laughter sounded forced now. They could feel it too, even if they wouldn't admit it. We drove off, leaving the lot behind, but as we turned the corner, I glanced out the back window, and my stomach dropped. The house was back, standing there like it had never disappeared, its broken windows glowing faintly in the moonlight. And on the porch, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure, watching us, grinning, waiting. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, but I knew I wasn't free of it. That night, when I got home, I locked every door, closed every window, and left every light on. But none of it helped, because at 3 a.m., I woke up to a familiar sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They were coming from the attic. I didn't have an attic. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear the sound again. The footsteps were faint, deliberate, pacing above me. But, as I said before, I didn't have an attic. I grabbed my phone, the flashlight trembling in my grip as I turned it on. The pale light barely cut through the darkness of my room, but it was enough to see the door to the hallway. I told myself it wasn't real. I told myself that the exhaustion, the stress, and the terror of the night had finally caught up with me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, heavier, like whatever was up there wanted me to know it was coming. Gathering what little courage I had left, I crept out of bed and slowly opened my bedroom door. The hallway stretched before me, dark and silent, but I could still hear the steps coming from above, moving toward the center of the house. I knew where the sound was leading me, the crawl space. I didn't want to go, but my legs moved on their own. Every step down the hallway felt like I was moving deeper into something I couldn't escape. I reached the small wooden hatch in the ceiling, the one I'd never even noticed before that night. It looked old, older than the rest of the house, like it had been there long before I moved in. I stood under the hatch, staring up at it as the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. My hands shook as I reached up, grabbing the small metal ring on the hatch door. I don't know why I opened it. I don't know what I thought I'd find. But when the hatch swung down and the ladder unfolded, my flashlight flickered, and for just a second, I saw something up there. A face, the same face I'd seen in the house, stretched, twisted, and grinning that horrible, jagged grin, its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and before I could scream, something reached down from the darkness, its long, thin fingers curling around the edges of the hatch. I stumbled backward, falling onto the floor as the ladder creaked. It was coming down. I scrambled to my feet, running back toward my bedroom and slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, throwing myself against the door, listening for the sound of it following me. But there was nothing. For a long moment, the only sound I could hear was my own breathing. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that I'd finally lost my grip on reality. But then I turned around, and I saw it. The figure was standing in the corner of my room, its body impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It wasn't grinning anymore. It was just staring at me, its hollow eyes boring into mine. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. It didn't respond. Instead, it raised one long, skeletal finger and pointed at me, and then it spoke. Its voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was loud, distorted, like a chorus of voices speaking in unison. "You invited me." I stumbled back, the words slamming into me like a physical force. My knees buckled, and I hit the floor, crawling away from it. "What are you talking about? I didn't—" But then it all came rushing back. The dare, the house, the dirt on the floor, the whispers, the handprints on my neck. When I had stepped into that room, I hadn't just walked into a random abandoned house. I had crossed into something else, something I couldn't escape. The figure stepped closer, its movements unnaturally jerky, like it didn't belong in this world. "You belong to us now," it said. Before I could scream, the lights in my room flickered and went out. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see it anymore, but I could feel it. I could feel its presence, pressing down on me, surrounding me, suffocating me, and then nothing. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and everything looked normal, almost too normal. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare, some horrible hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and unlocked the screen. There was a single photo in my camera roll that hadn't been there before, a picture of me, but it wasn't from that morning. I was standing in the doorway of the house from the night before, my flashlight in hand, staring up at the figure in the window. My face was pale, my expression frozen in terror, and in the background of the photo, scrawled across the wall in jagged letters, were the words, "Welcome home." I deleted the photo immediately, but it didn't matter. Every time I close my eyes now, I see that figure. I hear its footsteps, and I know I'll never really be free.